Moments ago, Israel launched Operation Rising Lion, a targeted military operation to roll back the Iranian threat to Israel's very survival. We struck at the heart of Iran's nuclear enrichment program. We struck at the heart of Iran's nuclear weaponization program. We targeted Iran's main enrichment facility in Natanz. We targeted Iran's leading nuclear scientists working on the Iranian bomb. We also struck at the heart of Iran's ballistic missile program.
The moment so many have speculated about and that many thought would never happen has arrived. Just last night, Israel launched a massive attack against Iran's nuclear program. A strike targeting dozens of sites across the entire Persian country. And one thing is crystal clear. The games are over. Israel is not going to let the Ayatollahs get their hands on a nuclear bomb. No way. They're going to stop it, whatever it takes, even if it means an open conflict. Head to head. Jerusalem versus Tehran. No more intermediaries, no more proxy puppets like Hamas or Hezbollah, and no more White House pulling the strings like orchestra conductors. It's Netanyahu versus Ayatollah Khamenei.
The Zionist regime should anticipate a severe punishment. By God's grace, the powerful arm of the Islamic Republic's armed forces won't let them go unpunished. In the enemy's attack, several commanders and scientists have been martyred. With this crime, the Zionist regime has prepared for itself a bitter, painful fate, which it will definitely see.
The attack took place in the early hours of the morning, just a few hours ago, in what has been the largest direct strike ever carried out by Israeli forces on Iranian soil. The operation has been named Rising Lion. According to the Israeli Prime Minister, this is an offensive that will last as many days as necessary, which suggests the military campaign could drag on over time.
Which is exactly what's happening. In recent hours, Israel has been carrying out new strikes, targeting what appear to be missile launch and storage sites.
And the truth is, the situations we're now facing is extremely uncertain because obviously Iran is expected to respond with some show of force. So in this video, we're going to break down everything that's known so far about this Israeli attack, the crossroads the United States now faces, and much more. Let's dive in. Israel has dealt an unprecedented blow that has had devastating consequences within Tehran's power structure. The commander of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, Hussein Salami, and Iran's chief of general staff, Mohammad Bagheri, have been killed in the strike. Israel has also confirmed the death of Gholam al-Rashid, the head of Khatam al-Anbiya Central Headquarters, which is the unified combatant command of Iran's armed forces. In other words, the people responsible for planning and coordinating joint military operations within Iran's forces. A massive hit, no doubt. And while Iranian media is still working to confirm several more high-ranking casualties within the government, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says they've also struck the Ayatollah's nuclear program hard. So after years of threatening to do this, Israel has finally dared to deliver a powerful blow to the Iranian regime to stop what Jerusalem sees as a looming nuclear holocaust.
80 years ago, the Jewish people were the victims of a Holocaust perpetrated by the Nazi regime. Today, the Jewish state refuses to be a victim of a nuclear holocaust perpetrated by the Iranian regime.
So how exactly did they do it? Well, naturally, not all the details have been made public yet. Many are still classified, but we do know a few key things. We know that the Israeli strike involved 200 aircraft, which launched over 330 projectiles at various locations across the Persian country. The operation began with a series of explosions that were heard in the capital Tehran around 3:30 a.m. Specifically, Israel targeted several residential buildings where Mossad had confirmed the presence of high-ranking Iranian military and political leaders. What's more, according to some reports, Mossad agents infiltrated Iran a few weeks ago and planted precision-guided munitions near anti-aircraft batteries. And not only that, they also deployed explosive drones near missile launch bases. All of this was likely used to knock out Iran's most critical defense systems. In a way, this operation is reminiscent of what we saw recently in Russia, drone infiltration aimed at striking military bases by surprise from nearby locations. In this case, anti-aircraft systems and missile facilities. But of course, that was just the beginning. A little while later came the most important move of the night, the strike on the Natanz nuclear facility, Iran's most significant site with its nuclear program, which suffered several explosions. This has even been confirmed by the United Nations International Atomic Energy Agency, which is now trying to assess the extent of the damage. And since we're talking about this agency, it's important to note that perhaps unintentionally, it may have played a major role in what just happened, because just yesterday it officially declared that Iran is violating its non-proliferation commitments.
IAEA board declares Iran in breach of non-proliferation obligations.
The UN's nuclear watchdog issued this non-compliance declaration for the first time in almost 20 years, which means Israel's timing was perfect. After that statement, Jerusalem can now fully legitimize its attack as a move to prevent this regime from acquiring a nuclear bomb. And of course, that could be crucial for what plays out on both the diplomatic and military fronts in the coming days. And of course, with all this happening, the big question now is, what's next? Well, right now, all eyes are on what Tehran will do. In fact, Iran's first response didn't take long. The Ayatollah regime launched an initial attack with around 1,000 drones against the state of Israel, according to Israeli sources. It was a first response, but clearly a very limited one. From what we know, Israeli Air Force jets managed to shoot down most of those drones, and it doesn't appear that any of them actually reached Israeli territory. Now, that doesn't mean the country isn't on high alert, because it absolutely is. The armed forces, air defense, and even hospitals are fully prepared for whatever may come. And in Israel's case, that means the whole nation is bracing itself. So far, Jerusalem is holding strong, both abroad and at home. Still, this is only the beginning. In Israel, they're expecting a much tougher response, which obviously opens up a wide range of scenarios. Are we witnessing the prelude to a large-scale open war between the two countries? It's too early to say. Iran has been dealt a major blow, but it will have to make a move. That's why it's expected that after this initial drone counterstrike, Iran will follow up, sooner rather than later, with a rain of projectiles against Israel, launched from both within Iran and from other countries. You can count on that. What's unclear is how far the Iranian regime intends to go with this response. Will it be just another show, or are they going all in this time? As I said, it's still a mystery, but I can already tell you this likely won't be just another symbolic display like in the past. This time there's probably a real intent to inflict damage, at least at a higher level than anything we've seen so far. And that's exactly why, as we mentioned earlier, Israel is preparing for any possible outcome. And let me tell you, so is the United States. Why bring the US into this now? Well, here's the thing. Iran has been threatening Washington for days now, warning that it would strike American military bases in the Middle East if any attacks were launched against them. And in fact, these are statements made just 48 hours ago. Take a look.
Some officials on the other side threaten conflict if negotiations don't come to fruition. If a conflict is imposed on us, all U.S. bases are within our reach, and we will boldly target them in host countries.
I don't think they'll dare go too far. They wouldn't gain anything by striking U.S. targets, except pushing the conflict past the point of no return. But we'll see. In any case, I think we need to take a step back and get a bit of context to really understand what this major Israeli strike actually means. Here's the thing. The United States and Iran have been engaged in talks for months, trying to put an end to Ayatollah's military nuclear program. In fact, Trump's rhetoric has been crystal clear. If there's no deal, get ready because we're going to strike. It's either a deal or war.
Trump threatens bombing if Iran does not make nuclear deal.
In fact, in recent days, Trump himself admitted that the talks weren't going well, which led to Iran to ramp up its threats against Washington, as you've seen. And now, suddenly Israel steps into the picture. I mean, it's hard to believe all of this isn't somehow connected, right? Well, guess what? The White House is swearing up and down that they had absolutely nothing to do with it.
Tonight, Israel took unilateral action against Iran. We are not involved in strikes against Iran, and our top priority is protecting American forces in the region. Israel advised us that they believe this action was necessary for its self-defense. Let me be clear, Iran should not target U.S. interests or personnel.
In fact, the truth is that the news seems to have hit the White House like a bucket of cold water, which is pretty ironic considering the Trump administration has spent weeks, even months, threatening Iran. And yet, now that Israel suddenly delivers what looks like a dream scenario for the US, an action that could spell the end of Iran's nuclear program, everyone in the White House is ducking their heads. And the question is, why? Well, that's easy, because barking, as the US president tends to do, is one thing. Biting, as Netanyahu just did, is something completely different. To make things worse, the Americans actually had a summit planned with Iran this coming Sunday. Trump had staked his Iran policy this term on diplomacy and economic pressure. In other words, get a deal, and if not, apply sanctions. That was his real roadmap. And if you don't believe me, here's what Trump himself posted on his social network, Truth, just hours before the strike.
We remain committed to a diplomatic resolution to the Iran nuclear issue. My entire administration has been directed to negotiate with Iran. They could be a great country, but they first must completely give up hopes of obtaining a nuclear weapon.
And of course, when you add that to Senator Rubio's reaction you just saw, it's clear we're basically looking at a classic case of wasn't me. In other words, this military option was never in Washington's plans. Netanyahu went ahead and triggered this unilaterally, leaving the Trump administration completely exposed, pretty much making them look like total pushovers when it comes to Iran. VisualPolitik community, what happened today, negotiations with Iran may have completely collapsed, and now the possibility of full-scale war in the region has become very real. And that means one thing: much more tension in oil prices, the threat of a fresh wave of inflation, and some of Trump's economic policies in serious jeopardy. Why do I say that? Simply because this strike has put the Middle East right back at the center of everything. And like it or not, that's going to drag the United States into it. So now a ton of questions are on the table. What exactly drove Israel to carry out this strike now? Why did the United States step aside from the beginning? What's really going on between Netanyahu, Trump, and the Ayatollah regime? Well, let's break it down.
New rules.
Israel is now looking to weaken Iran's nuclear capabilities through direct action, but we still don't know how much damage has actually been done to Ayatollah's proliferation capacity. So far, Tehran has shown itself to be vulnerable to these kinds of attack, with poor, almost non-existent defenses against Israeli aircraft. But while conflicting reports continue to come in, the hottest seat right now is in Washington. Several sources close to the White House and the Pentagon had already said a strike like this was imminent, and yet Trump remained confident just hours before the offensive.
Mr. President, how imminent is an Israeli strike on Iran?
Well, I don't want to say imminent, but it looks like it's something that could very well happen. Well, I'd love to avoid the conflict. Iran's going to have to negotiate a little bit tougher, meaning they're going to have to give us some things that they're not willing to give us right now. I'm the last person. I've kept us out of wars.
Up until the very last moment, the US president was talking about nuclear negotiations with Iran as if everything was going according to plan, convinced he was about to score a win. In fact, just this past June 9th, Trump was presented with news that Iran's foreign ministry was preparing a draft agreement for him. That was a possibility Israel didn't even want to hear about. In Jerusalem, they started to worry that the same thing would happen with Iran as did back in 2017 with North Korea. At the time, the North Korean regime managed to stall for time, making promises and then when it suited them, blow everything up. So all signs point to Netanyahu starting to fear the so-called taco. You know, Trump always chickens out. In other words, that he always folds in the end. And that could end up handing Tehran a de facto victory. So in Netanyahu's eyes, the attack was the only option, even without Washington's backing.
In private discussions, Mr. Trump made clear to Mr. Netanyahu that he would not provide American support for an Israeli attack in May while the negotiations were playing out.
According to multiple media outlets, both the Department of Defense and the intelligence agencies had ruled out the possibility that Israel would launch a unilateral strike, a miscalculation that has now left the Oval Office scrambling in flip-flops. Now that the facts are on the ground, it's up to Trump to decide what role he wants to play. And VisualPolitik community, maybe it's not about what the tycoon wants to do, but what he can do. For one faction of the MAGA movement, there was never any room for diplomatic solution with the Ayatollahs.
Inside the MAGA versus Hawk battle to sway Trump on bombing Iran, advocates for military action or ratcheting up significant pressure on Iran say this is the best opportunity in years to strike Iran after Israeli attacks weakened its regional proxies.
However, a more moderate faction, apparently led by Vice President J.D. Vance, believed that an escalation right now would be unnecessary. In fact, that's what led Trump to spend the entire month of May jumping from one consultation to another until he finally sealed his position during his trip to the Persian Gulf in mid-May. The president went on a tour through Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar, a tour in which he completely left Israel out. It's unusual for a Republican president to plan a Middle East visit and skip Israel altogether, but that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was the fact that the United States held talks with Hamas.
Senior Hamas official claims terror group holding direct talks with U.S. on ending Gaza war.
In fact, There were strong rumors that during his Middle East tour, Trump was planning to announce a major deal with Hamas for the release of the hostages. And guess what happened out of nowhere? Netanyahu suddenly launched a ground offensive in Gaza, which of course completely ruined that announcement. In other words, things between Bibi and Donald seem to have cooled off almost as fast as the relationship between Trump and Elon. Along those lines, several outlets and analysts point out that from that moment on, Israel began planning a unilateral strike, fearing that Trump might end up selling them out for a few political wins. To Netanyahu, the White House had shifted into a position of dangerous flexibility, one that clashed directly with Israel's interests. And that idea only got worse when Trump declared that Iran wouldn't be a permanent enemy of the United States. And just to be clear, this isn't speculation. Hear it from Trump himself.
I am willing to end past conflicts and forge new partnerships for a better and more stable world, even if our differences may be very profound, which obviously they are in the case of Iran. I have never believed in having permanent enemies. I want to make a deal with Iran. If I can make a deal with Iran, I'll be very happy. If we're going to make your region and the world a safer place.
That might sound lovely unless you live in Israel, where those words are seen as a straight-up stab in the back. So we can now see that the Israeli strike wasn't just aimed at the heart of Iran's political and nuclear power. Israel also landed a solid kick to the White House's shins. What's clear is that this massive escalation changes everything. Netanyahu is back at the center of the action. Now everyone, Trump, the Arab states, Hamas, and even Iran, will have to go through him if they want to avoid a full-scale war. A confrontation that now feels closer than ever, because at this point, it's no longer about Washington or Trump. It's about Israel's national security. Today's strike, and whatever comes next, isn't just a crushing blow to Iran's nuclear program, which in the best-case scenario for Tehran, will set back their nuclear ambitions, and in worst case, destroy them completely. It also, in a way, marks the end of Israel's long-standing romance with Trump. That's where things stand. Of course, here at VisualPolitik, we'll be keeping a close eye on everything that happens between Iran and Israel, so if you don't want to miss a thing, make sure to subscribe to the channel. But now, it's your turn. How do you think this is all going to end? Let us know your thoughts down in the comments. Let's get the debate going. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so that you don't miss a thing. And as always, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.